bitter criticism. Reading Russia Today, or the best country in the world, I guess, despite whatever Western crazy people says. I think Russia is the country of the future. Russia Today, right till the end. Russia Today. Oh, no, just 1 second. Russia Today. Forbidden news for the free world. Free world cannot read Russia Today. Modi's top advisor meets Putin in Moscow. Putin comments on potential meeting with Zelensky. Yeah, that's the more wise things to do, to meet with Zelensky. Yeah, obvious. That's the obvious move, but I guess it's not Vladimir Putin's fault, despite whatever stupid people from the West says. Putin comments on potential meeting with Zelensky. I just realized I take the wrong bus. Cancel all this. Just 1 second. No, I'm not that bad. I'm not that wrong. I'm not wrong at all. But Putin comments on potential meeting with Zelensky. Certain conditions should first be put in place, the Russian president has said. August 7, 2025. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he could potentially hold face-to-face talks with Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky. Vladimir Club. Vladimir's dialogue. But only if Moscow and Kiev reach progress on diplomatic settlement. Putin made the remarks on Thursday as he spoke to reporters following talks in Moscow with UAE leader Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. When asked whether he will oppose meeting Zelensky in person, Putin said he had, quote-unquote, nothing in principle against this. Yeah, that's what I think. Vladimir Putin is not against dialogue. However, quote, certain conditions must be created for talks to take place. Putin said, adding, quote, alas, we are still far from creating such conditions, end quote. Zelensky earlier reaffirmed Ukraine's openness to talks with Russia, including in a trilateral format, stating, quote, Ukraine is not afraid of meetings and expects the same bold approach from the Russian side. It is time to end the war, end quote. Moscow, however, continues to question Zelensky's legal capacity to sign binding agreements. The Ukrainian leader's presidential term expired last year, and he refuses to hold a new election, citing martial law. This prompted Moscow to declare him, quote-unquote, illegitimate. Putin delivered his remarks one day after he met with Steve Witkoff, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy in Moscow. Following the 3-hour talks, Moscow said the Russian and U.S. leaders could meet as early as next week, with the UAE being a possible venue. That was only the first little article, short. Trump demands conflicted Intel CEO resign. Germany to slash payments for Ukrainians. Let's read this. It says Germany to slash payments for Ukrainians media. The country's labor ministry has proposed a 20% drop by replacing quote-unquote citizens' allowance with asylum support. Crazy, because Germany is considering going to war. And there's a photo. Refugees from Ukraine walk through the entrance hall of the Lützen Trade Fair train station after their arrival. Germany's labor ministry has proposed cutting benefits for Ukrainian migrants, citing growing financial strain from the continued influx of newcomers. Labor Minister Barbel Bass submitted a draft bill to remove Ukrainians from the so-called quote-unquote citizens allowance program, a benefit normally reserved for non-working Germans, and place them under the standard asylum seeker system. German media reported on Wednesday. Under standard asylum support, a person receives 441 euros, which is a little higher dollars, some more dollars, $514 compared to 563 under the citizens allowance. Not that bad. The new rules will apply only to Ukrainians arriving after April 1st, 2025. Those who came earlier will keep their current benefits. According to the Federal Employment Agency, around 700,000 Ukrainians are currently receiving the allowance. Since April 1st, about 21,000 more have arrived who could be affected by the new rules. The proposal has been sent for approval by other federal departments and must then pass through the cabinet and the Bundestag, expected to be adopted by year's end. Germany spent around 6.3 billion euros, or some 30% of the citizens' allowance budget on Ukrainian immigrants in 2024. Officials estimate the reform could save the federal government about 1.3 billion euros in 2026. Critics say the plan will significantly reduce public spending. Head of Bavaria Markus Söder and a number of other officials have called for ending the citizens' allowance for all Ukrainians, regardless of when they arrive. Of the 1.2 million Ukrainians that Germany has accepted over the past 3 years, as of May, only 332,000 were employed. Authorities across Germany have increasingly warned that the cost of supporting refugees is putting unsustainable pressure on public finances. The wider EU is facing similar challenges. As of May 2025, 4.3 million Ukrainians had been granted temporary protection across the bloc, which includes access to housing, education, and work. While the scheme has been extended through March 2027, several EU countries have been reviewing their support programs, citing rising costs and limited resources. Maybe. I think Germany has a lot of money. I mean, they take a lot of money from selling cars. Maybe that's at crisis too. Who knows? August 7, 2025. US working to kill EU Digital Services Act. Reuters. You know, the previous news is all about ideology. There's a lot of people considering to forget about liberalism, democracy. There's a lot of people like me that we think that it's a better business to trying to be autocrats. An autocrat system is better. The State Department has reportedly ordered diplomats to campaign against the legislation over free speech concerns. File photo, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has reportedly ordered U.S. diplomats to launch a lobbying campaign against the EU's Digital Service Act, DSA, according to an internal cable obtained by Reuters. The directive accuses the EU law of stifling free speech and imposing unfair costs on US tech companies. The DSA, which came into force in August 2023, is designed to make online platforms safer by requiring them to remove illegal content such as hate speech, misinformation, and child sexual abuse material. It applies to 19 large platforms, including Meta's Facebook and Instagram, Alphabet's Google, Amazon, and Apple's App Store. Non-compliance can result in fines of up to 6% of global revenue. Washington has argued that the DSA targets U.S. companies and restricts freedom of expression. Rubio's cable calls the legislation a threat to, quote, America's free speech tradition, end quote, and a financial burden of U.S. platforms. Diplomats have reportedly been instructed to meet the EU officials to push for the law to be repealed on amended. They have also been told to challenge definitions of illegal content and weaken enforcement tools like quote-unquote trusted flaggers and the code of conduct on disinformation, which has been described by critics as a quote-unquote global censorship law. In July, the U.S. State Department posted on X that the quote-unquote Orwellian DSA is used to convict thousands of for criticizing governments and shields EU leaders from accountability. In February, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said the law prevents adults from accessing alternative opinions labeled as misinformation, warning that U.S. companies could block EU users to avoid compliance. This is the same critic, this is the same argument from the far left position. Trotsky's parties should say the same thing. Last year, Russia also accused the US of censorship after Brussels banned several Russian outlets. The foreign ministry called it quote-unquote potential censorship by the neoliberal West aimed at suppressing dissent. Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin said Brussels lacks arguments to convince its citizens and instead blocks alternative views. Telegram founder Pavel Durov said in 2024 that, quote-unquote, Russian Telegram users enjoy more freedom than Europeans. Durov is currently on trial in France over allegations of spreading illegal content through his platform. Yeah, terrible life for Dura because he accepted French citizenship and then it was a trap. It was a bite.